what he had seen was not, I'll have to quote here, not of this earth. He was very, very adamant about it.
What Haught didn't know back then was that a second wreckage site, 120 miles from the Brazel Ranch, had also been found, and on the same day. Numerous witnesses, including an archaeology team, say they saw a large crashed disc and the bodies of at least 4 alien creatures. Like the Brazel site, this second location was sealed off by the military, and witnesses were told to keep their mouths shut.
So when you get such a consistency of input from respectable people, people whose testimony you'd like on your side in the court of law, ask any attorney, you're stuck. What are you going to do from there? These people are telling the truth. It's not one person, it's not 10 people, it's over 100 people.
As Friedman reveals in his book, Crash at Corona, dozens of former military personnel have surfaced over the years who say they saw, handled, or transported either the wreckage, the alien bodies, or both. Bob Shirky, the former assistant operations officer at Roswell Field, is one of them.
Colonel Blanchard had called down and said, set up a plane to go to Fort Worth. He said, I want a B-29. And then Colonel Blanchard showed up in a couple of cars, and the people come hurrying into the building, and Colonel Blanchard stepped into this doorway into the operations office to get out of the hallway. And that's when I said, Colonel Blanchard, you're blocking my view, you know. And I peeked over his shoulder as a couple people went by carrying various pieces of metal. And one of them pretty good size, about 2 by 4.
Shirky says he knew other people who had knowledge of the wreckage or bodies, including a nurse at the base hospital who claimed to have seen horrid alien carcasses. Shirky has also remained friends with Glenn Dennis, the town mortician.
He said to me, did you see the sketches in the paper of the humanoids or the bodies? And I said, yes. He says, well, I can tell you that's what they look like. He says, our funeral parlor supplied the caskets for the Air Force to use because we had the contract. And they came in and took all the baby-size or youth-sized caskets we had.
When this crash saucer event took place, the military told him, if you ever talk about what you saw, we will kill you and we will kill your family.
While a cover story was being spoon-fed to gullible media, more dramatic steps were taken to ensure that the story of the saucer and bodies would spread no further. Mac Brazel, for instance, was held incommunicado for a week, and when he finally re-emerged, had changed his story about what he found. Sheriff George Wilcox confided in later years that the lives of his family had been threatened by the military unless he kept out of the investigation. His own samples of the strange metal were seized. A Roswell radio station was ordered by the FBI to cease transmission of a story about the crash. But the most effective subterfuge involved the transport of the alleged alien flotsam. Witnesses and records indicate that some of the material was immediately flown to Fort Worth, then on to Wright-Patterson Air Base in Ohio, and perhaps to Washington, D.C. The official Army story is that once the weather balloon mix-up was discovered, plans for transporting the material were canceled altogether, a statement that is demonstrably false. Pilots who flew the material out of Roswell have confirmed the Army was lying. One pilot even claimed to have seen the alien bodies while in flight. This official FBI memo, dated July 8, 1947, clearly indicates that a, quote, disc was being transported from Roswell to Wright-Patterson by a special plane for examination. Wendell Stevens was at Wright-Patterson back then and remembers far more furor than should have been generated by a weather balloon.
My immediate superior, who was Colonel Albert Boyd at the time, later became 3-star General Albert Boyd and the commander of the Edwards Air Force Base Flight Test Center. He was my immediate superior, and he was one of the officers that flew General Twining out to Kirtland Air Force Base on the night of the 3rd of July.
More than 200 witnesses in all have now come forward with bits and pieces of information about the New Mexico events, much of it first-hand information. Yet the official files of those agencies charged with investigating UFOs over the years contain virtually nothing about the case, not even files which might discredit it. There is more than enough evidence to suggest that something extraordinary happened in the New Mexican desert back in 1947, and that the military went to great lengths to hide the truth.
We have the general who took the call from Washington saying to cover it up. We have the rancher, his son, the people around him, neighbors that he talked to. They come up with a consistent story, descriptions of not only the wreckage, but how he was treated by the government. We have the media people in the town of Roswell. Some of them are still alive. We have the guy who put out the press release. He's never changed his story in the 14 years since I've been talking to Walter Howe. We have the FBI memo.
Even more unsettling is the possibility that there have been other crashes and other cover-ups. UFO researcher Linda Howe says she has been shown documents by military officials which refer to several saucer crashes and recoveries. Bill Moore, who co-authored the first book on the Roswell affair, says he has been shown similar documents. And Timothy Good has heard credible testimony from some of the best-known military leaders of this century.
General George Marshall was supposed to have something to do with it. Marshall became quite forthcoming and admitted that there had been contact with UFOs and that there had been at least 3 crashes and occupants had been recovered, and he went on to say that the occupants of UFOs were hoping to eventually adapt to the atmospheric conditions on this planet.
If there have been crashes and recoveries, if alien wreckage and even bodies have been found, where are they? What's being done with the proof? And why can't the public be told? More on these topics is still ahead.
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
Retired Marine Corps officer Donald Keyhoe is widely regarded as the father of the UFO cover-up theory. In books, magazines, and broadcast appearances during the 50s and 60s, the bulldogish Keyhoe became the single most painful dagger in the belly of the Air Force, a relentless crusader who relied on his own military sources to expose Pentagon lies about UFOs, and there were plenty.
They are simply following orders to explain away all UFO sightings as quickly as possible when they become public and deny that UFOs really exist.
The Air Force went to such extremes in trying to explain away UFOs that it lost credibility, even with sympathetic media. In the mid-1960s, the U.S. was engulfed in an intensive 2-year UFO wave, during which hundreds of thousands of Americans claimed to have seen UFOs. Alan Hynek, Project Blue Book's designated explainer, inadvertently punctuated the mid-60s flap when he announced that UFO sightings by hundreds of Michigan residents were inspired by swamp gas, an excuse which was ridiculed nationally and which prompted calls for a congressional inquiry into UFOs. Under pressure, the Air Force agreed to sponsor what it called an independent scientific study of UFOs. Several universities declined the job, which eventually went to esteemed University of Colorado physicist Dr. Edward Condon. But any hopes for an objective study were dashed even before the project began. Condon himself stated in public that the government should get out of the UFO business and that UFO writers should be horsewhipped. His project coordinator caused his own stir when one of his memos was leaked, stating that the staff would consist of non-believers and that the, quote, trick would be to make the study appear objective. Several staff members resigned, complaining that the results were rigged. Nevertheless, the Condon report predictably concluded that UFOs weren't worth studying, and the Air Force used the Condon report as a reason to cancel Blue Book altogether in 1969.
None of the evidence that I have examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
We have not been hiding anything. The investigations have been made public. The explanations of those where there is a clear explanation have been made public.
Hynek, of course, would soon change his mind about Blue Book and about UFOs, and would become the most important figure in the history of American ufology. Jacques Vallée was his closest associate.